Good afternoon, everyone. So good to see so many of you popping up. I am Vanessa Thomas, Director of Global Programs at Decolonizing Wealth Project. We're a foundation that disrupts the flow of capital through education, radical reparative giving, and narrative change. And I'm really happy to welcome you all to a conversation on racial justice and transformation in philanthropy with Derek Bardowell and Edgar Villanueva. October is Black History Month in the UK, and to celebrate that, we have invited one of our faves, Derek, over to talk about his work and new book. This should be a fantastic conversation, so please do pop your thoughts and questions in the chat function. If you're following or adding to the conversation on social media, follow us and use the hashtag Decolonizing Wealth with a Z, sorry, my UK folks, and UK Black History Month. So that's Decolonizing Wealth with a Z and UK Black History Month. Okay, over to you, Edgar.
Thank you, Vanessa, and happy Black History Month to all of my friends over in the UK. And welcome to my friend Derek Bardowell. I am really honored to be in conversation with you today about all the things: racial justice, transformation, and philanthropy, and your new book. For those who may not know Derek, I'm sure everyone in the UK does, but maybe on this side of the pond, there's some folks who are new. I have really been just enjoying getting to know Derek, and I'm having, as one colleague earlier described, a bit of a bromance because I am really encaptured by his passion for this work, his sense of justice, and the impact that he's making on philanthropy and beyond. But Derek is an author. And I actually didn't know this until this week, Derek, as I was reading more about your bio, that there's another book that you've written that's a sports memoir called No Win Race, which was a Sunday Times and Financial Times Book of the Year in 2019. Derek is the CEO of 10 Years Time, a Knowledge Equity Fellow at the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship at the University of Oxford, host of the podcast, The Just Cause, and a trustee at 30 Percy Foundation and Mission 44. Just so happy to have you here, a fellow author and social justice warrior in the space of philanthropy and beyond. Welcome, Derek. I'm so excited to chat with you. And this thing here that I got this week, I've been pouring through it, and it is such an amazing read. So this is the new book, everyone, Giving Back: How to Do Good Better. Highly recommend it. And we're going to be digging into this book today. But Derek, by way of introduction, we'd love for you to just tell us, who's your people? This is what we say in my community. Who's your people? Where are you from? Who are the people that shaped your lens? And what led you to write this new book?
Well, thanks, Edgar, and thanks for having me. My people, so first my fam and my family, because I always say that, growing up in the East End of London wasn't always the easiest. It was very much growing up in a time of Thatcherism, which meant that racism and unreported racism, state violence was very common, and very much my family, my mum and dad, my two older sisters were the ones that kind of incubated me and protected me from a lot of that work. But I guess the part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is that I was heavily politicized from a very young age. From the time that I was at primary school, I'd been stopped and searched by police, and having shop owners calling the police on me, and various other things that kind of meant that I couldn't avoid some of those the politics of growing up Black in Britain. So that stayed with me. It stayed with me in every facet of my life and everything that I've done. But the reason why I'm still here a lot of the time is because of my family and my folks, for protecting me in that way.
That's so beautiful. And I can deeply relate to that. So we do want to just again mention that it is Black History Month in the UK, and I understand this has been a celebration now for 35 years. And so I'm curious to just know how, for you in this moment of celebrating Black history, Black excellence, all things Black, What are you really hopeful for about right now for Black communities in the UK, and where do you see that there's still a lot of progress that is long overdue?
Yeah, so I think, Black History Month can be slightly divisive in the sense of, in the one sense, it's great that it's here and that we celebrate it, but what does it really mean if people invite you to do talks and it suddenly pops up on the educational curriculum for a month, and then you're being oppressed for the other 11 months of the year. So there is that sort of aspect to it. But what I like to emphasize in terms of the positive nature of it is that I think it gives an opportunity, particularly in this country, to really celebrate Black Britishness. And what is often the case is that we very much laud what happens in the United States or in the Caribbean or in parts of Africa, in terms of activism, in terms of culture, music, entertainment, politics, and sometimes as Black Britons, we can be slightly dwarfed by some of that. Or treated like the younger sibling that didn't quite take the direct hits as some of the other countries did in terms of slavery and colonialism and things of that nature. So I think that opportunity to celebrate everyone from Bernie Grant to Claudia Jones, from Stephen Lawrence to Amy Ashwood, Garvey, Bernardine Evaristo to Linton Kwesi Johnson, I think that is really important in terms of our own identity and how we forge that, how we forge our identity in relation to other countries, but also our own activism and the identity that we're gaining around that. And I would say that's where I feel really hopeful, is that I feel like the newer generation, in terms of their activism, in terms of their innovation, are really doing things from an intergenerational and intersectional lens. I think they're really grabbing some of the things from the past in order to, activate what change should look like in the future. So I think it's an absolutely superb, change of direction for us moving forward. And I think that celebration should be a catalyst for change in the future.
I love that. I love that. Well, let's talk about this book, which I have just spent hours in it last night, and it's just what we needed, Derek. So thank you. The Giving Back: How to Do Good Better just came out this year. Will you tell us just a bit about the book? What called you to write it? How have folks been receiving this book so far, particularly in the UK?
So, the book is very much around reimagining philanthropy through a reparative lens. And it's really about changing people's mindsets from the notion that we have now of philanthropy, of giving, to one of giving back. When I envisage philanthropy, everyone looks at it as this kind of institutional practice, which you've written a lot about in Decolonizing Wealth, which is very top down. It's about the have and have nots. It's about something that creates this facade, this statue around doing good, when the majority of it has been accumulated through, extractive means and exploitative means. So for me, it's around how that money and capital is redistributed, and how that is redistributed to the most impacted communities and those that have been most impacted by growth economies, so they get that money to determine their own destinies. So for me, there shouldn't be institutional philanthropy. That should die. And that money and that wealth should be redistributed to Black and Brown and Indigenous communities to be able to determine their own destinies. And as I said, that's when you're talking about moving the institution of philanthropy to more of a cultural practice, and something where risk and reward is shared, and it's akin to a lot of the traditions that would be familiar to us and our communities growing up, in terms of what real philanthropy, love of humanity, is really about. And I think for me, there's two quotes that really sort of encapsulate some of that, which is one from June Jordan, when she talked about really enabling communities to birth their own realities. That has always struck me. And then Ella Baker, when talking about activism, she always talked about making a life, not a living. And I think those two things really sort of encapsulate it. So for me, it was really around outlining some of the steps that we can or should take in order to move towards being able to start giving back. And the way that I constructed the book was, I kind of started off the first section as the kind of, and I did this through a kind of head, heart, and hands framework. So the head bit is, this is the politics of philanthropy. This is the DNA of philanthropy. This is where the money's come from, and this is what it's like working in there, you know. So I really wanted to emphasize that what you see on the outside really isn't a reality when you get on the inside of working in philanthropy, in terms of who makes the decisions and who gets to decide what's worthy or not, and where this money goes to, and how little of that money is actually distributed. And then I go into the heart section, which is really personal narrative, but where I feature a number of personal narratives about why they give, from amazing activists, from Mara Ayalarisai, Michelle Daly, Whitney Isles, Ruth Adegbuna, who all sort of speak about what got them into this particular work, and that really speaks to the heart. And then the final section is about the hands. You know, what are the principles that sits behind giving back, and what can you do about you know, your giving going forward? And that's not just for institutional philanthropists, charitable trusts. That's you know, for everyone. Because, as I said, if it becomes a cultural practice, it will be around everyone. So I kind of illustrate that through stories of people across the globe doing good, and also just ensuring that there's amazing people from, you know, Fazana Khan at Healing Justice London to Amara Spence at Yard, you know, that we get to hear from them and the work that they're doing, because a lot of this great work is on our doorsteps.
Absolutely. You did a really beautiful job of bringing in the narrative, and as you said, the head, the heart, and the hands. And there's so many great quotes that it's like every quote that I love is compiled in one place. I was just highlighting away in my copy of the book last night. I want to just take a moment to go inside for a moment, because you and I have had a shared experience of working inside, as I call the belly of the beast, sometimes of institutional philanthropy or other institutions that are really like white dominated with what I call colonial dynamics. And just wanted to, ask you to kind of speak a little bit to your experience of what that was like for you, and what do we need to do to change this? Because in the work that I do, we do a lot of healing work and gathering for people of color in philanthropy. And there's a lot that people are holding, and a lot that they wish that white colleagues in this sector would understand about our experiences. So what might you say about your experience and what we as a sector need to do to make space for the brilliance of Black and Brown people?
So one of the lines from your book, Decolonizing Wealth, really stuck with me, which was about, the stodgy relative who's wearing clothes that have gone out of fashion. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing, but that really stuck to me, because that is what it feels like being inside of it. And I think it's really weird, because in the one sense, you're in this really privileged position because you do hold power, because you are responsible for distributing money. In another sense, you're also watching the dynamics of society, the hierarchies, the fact that, pretty much older white men are making all of the decisions around issues that they have no knowledge of. And you have these systems and structures, ways in which, in a very bureaucratic way, that communities are isolated. So you have the very blatant ways which you can really, combat in terms of the priorities of some funders. But then so much is wrapped around how a number of these funders weaponize bureaucracy, and how the emphasis on networks and private relationships really guide where money goes to. And you're watching it. And it's kind of like you can see it happening around you and you feel powerless to do much around it. So you end up doing that thing of, which I know so many people do, which is you end up sneaking, you know, some of your favorite projects through, or, you know, you have to, you know, really change the narrative to get stuff through. But you start to realize that even though you are getting more money into your communities on a systemic level, nothing's really changing. And then you get into that balance of, okay, I really need to, the only way that I can get into this is to become a trustee or to rise further to the top. But then you hit the glass ceiling and you're never quite sure why it is, or why you haven't got that tap on the shoulder to get into that position for the job and all of that. So it's a really disconcerting place to be in, because nothing is clear. Everything is ambiguous. It's institutionally racist. And you can say that from the decision making and who gets to make the decisions, to even when you would bring up things around racial justice, you know, the flinch that people would have in talking about race, racism, blackness, you would see it. They might not say it, but you would see it. You know, you would present something from a Black-led organization, and there would be an implication that it might be of a lesser quality. So they wouldn't necessarily turn around and say, we hate it or anything like that, but there'll be an implication. But because you don't have the power and you're speaking to a trustee who makes the decision about whether this organization makes money or not, then you kind of have to weave your way around it in order to do it. And I found it exhausting. I found it absolutely draining. I think when I got into it probably about 13 years ago, there wasn't things like what you're offering in terms of healing and support. Over here, there's like Future Foundations UK that provide support to people of color in the sector. There wasn't really that around. There was just the occasional other Black or brown face that you would sort of look at and see and go, what, you're in here too? Wow. And you sort of gravitate towards them and just, you know, sort of hug them tightly and say, great, there's someone else here. It's different, and it has improved in terms of the numbers that are in, but the structures and systems still remain pretty much the same, and the decision making and who holds the power is very much the same. But how was it? I need to ask that to you as well. How was it for you being in that structure and dealing with you know, that sort of hierarchical way of working?
It's traumatic. It is. It's, you know, very similar experience when I started in the sector, and being Native American, and one of, I think I knew one other Native American in the entire sector when I started in the field. But it is very traumatic, exhausting, as you said. I physically got sick at times from just the weight of trying to do good work and get resources to communities that desperately needed the resources, but trying to navigate systems, and also holding a fear of being punished for being out of line and not keeping with the status quo. And so, you know, I thought when I was younger, this was something unique to philanthropy, but what I've grown to understand is this is common in so many industries where we still have a long ways to go with diversity, and not just diversity, but really shifting our cultures to be one where everyone can have a sense of belonging and contribute. And you know, we still have quite a ways to go with diversity in the sector of philanthropy, with 90% of executives being white, 90% of trustees being white still. And so that's work to be done. But we also have to continue to interrogate the culture of how we show up and how we do business, and how power is operating in this sector. I will never forget the words of one of the participants in our healing program, a woman of color who we asked the question, what would you want your white colleagues to know, or your white board to know about your experience? And her response to that is, you're killing us. You're literally killing us. And that's how hard it feels to carry that weight of being oppressed and having to code switch. And Um, and the sad part of that is that look at the brilliance that the industry has missed out on for so long. And I'm so glad that we're now beginning to understand that and see the doors open and that there are platforms and new ways for our leadership. And I know that you've been a big part of that in the UK, making space for the leaders that are going to come after you. So I deeply sympathize with your experience there. And I just appreciate that you kept on, right, and have stayed in the space to make change.
But I think that's, that quote is startling, but also incredibly profound, because I think that's where the frustration comes from, right? Is that part of the reason why we do this is because philanthropy has the freedom to do things differently. It doesn't have anything that stops it from being able to, fund more radically, fund longer term, to distribute money to whatever intermediaries to distribute if they can't do it or have the processes to do it themselves. It's not like some of our other systems, say in the UK, where, government intervention could really stop, certain pieces of work scaling. Philanthropy makes a choice to be able to only give away less than 5% of its wealth, or to give most of its money to, I don't know, Russell Group universities. It makes its choice. And I think that part of it, when you're in it and you're complicit and you're part of it, that's also part of what kills you, is because when you can see the barriers in other institutions, you kind of understand where the fight is coming from. Often when you are sitting in front of a board and it's their decisions right in front of you, there is a person there that has enough power to turn around and say, we can give away 1 or 2% of our endowment towards, and that's just 1 or 2%. I'm not saying it should be more, but I'm just saying 1 or 2% to Black and Brown led social change. We could give 20 million a year to tackling racial injustice. They have the power to do it. And when you're sitting there and you're being scrutinized over minimal, smaller grants or things of that nature, I think that part of it, and the lack of urgency. And also another colonial tool is the fact that they don't tend to change, not through moral or ethics or lived experience, but only through reputational or financial risk. Those are the only mechanisms that change happen. When you see that acting out in front of you, that also plays a part in that trauma and what you find very devastating about it.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to take a sip of tea from my Trust Me, I'm a Philanthropist coffee cup, because you are spilling tea and telling the truth right now. One thing that has really struck me as I have been doing more work in the UK and just learning about the history and the barriers to moving this work forward, is sort of the denial of racism that exists there. And this report from the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities that really suggested that institutional racism doesn't even exist, right? And so this is super disturbing because if there is sort of a universal denial, and also, as you pointed out in your book, the study that I alluded to in mine, of the majority of folks in the UK seeing colonization and sort of the expansion of the global empire being like a good thing, and that people of color, indigenous folks around the world are better off as a result of this white supremacist kind of mindset and action. Where do we go from here? Because as you're saying, especially in philanthropy, it's like reputational risk. Will we have to have more pandemics? How many more George Floyds are we going to have to see be murdered before there's real systemic change that takes place? What do we need to do here?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I always call it like the Empire State of Mind in terms of the UK, because it has a special type of complete denial of its past, you know, and an absolute, that's how we're educated in here. We are absolutely educated as if slavery was more about how we were saved or civilized by white folks, as opposed to the true horrors and atrocities around it. You know, even I think in the last week or two, the government has refused to vote for the UN resolution against racism, you know, because they don't agree that the slave trade and colonialism and the suffering that was caused by it was that there's a case for reparations around it. They don't want to even acknowledge that. So I find it really interesting, because if you can't acknowledge it or interrogate it, then your ability to do anything about it is you know, it's not going to happen. And what we've seen more recently is that the tactics, which again is more divide and rule tactics, is that the powers that be will put black and brown faces to front a lot of these messages on their behalf, to authenticate this type of stuff. So for me, it feels like what we're going through is probably the worst time that in my adult life, or certainly the worst time since Thatcherism, because it feels like those in power accelerating our extinction. They have seen what has happened since the death of George Floyd, but also the climate justice protests and things of that nature. They have seen all of that sort of stuff, and they are now doing their typical divide and rule tactics to ensure that the one thing that can make a change, which is a mass mobilization of the people, that doesn't happen, and that they pit one group off against the other. So for me, change will happen as it always does through mass mobilization. It will happen through people coming together and really being able to protest, you know, and people being able to really tackle these things. But what we're seeing in the UK is an all-out war against that. We're seeing human rights being taken away. We're seeing where I can envisage a time where state violence, particularly from the police and things of that nature, is potentially going to become more commonplace, and also where there's going to be a dilution of equalities data that, and as we have in some countries in in Europe, where you can't even understand where some of those data lines will be. But as I said, to counteract that, the level of innovation, activism, people that are creating legitimate systemic change with their innovations, and able to, you know, mobilize the masses. I'm seeing more of that. I'm also seeing a point where people in the UK really have got fed up. We don't tend to be a country that when things go wrong, that we do protest, but it's not like we call for the end of the government or a change in, you know, parliament and things of that nature. It doesn't tend to happen that way over here, which is a shame, because other countries, after the last 12 years of leadership that we've had, would probably be up in arms, but it doesn't really happen that way over in this country. But I think people are getting to that tipping point where things will change. But I also urge that with that we also need to mobilize around what we are fighting for, you know, and not, you know, responsive to what's bad, but what we are fighting for. And I think that's going to be important. I think what you said in your book around reparations and that being so important, a rallying cry, something that for me is really firm, and something that I wholeheartedly also believing, I think is a really important thing, because if you look at those right-wing rich folk and philanthropists, you know, you kind of know their game. You know their game is deregulation. We know their game is going to be minimal government. We know it's tax cuts. We know it's going to be a reduction of social services. We know the 4 or 5 things that they absolutely will fund or work with in order to preserve and grow their wealth. I think for us, we need to be clear about what are the things that we need to really have a beautiful and regenerative community and future for ourselves.
I love that. The moment on page 1, there's a beautiful quote about reparations from Whitney Ills or Alice, I'm not sure.
No, it was from Vanessa. It was partially me paraphrasing your own Vanessa Thomas. So yes, on that first page about
right. All right, Vanessa, for the shout out in the book. Reparations is what love looks like in public, and I love that you're bringing gas to that conversation and the movement for reparations globally. Those who follow DWP know that we are heavily involved in supporting that work here in the States, because I see no other way forward to address history and to bring that truth forward and to begin a process of reconciliation that heals all of us. So that's really beautiful. I know we're going to have to run out of time here soon, but I want to you mentioned these movements, and you highlight so beautifully the stories of so many activists and folks who are leading change, because there's so much that's broken, there's so much that's wrong, but there's so much that is happening that is inspiring. What's really inspiring you right now? I know that's hard to probably narrow it down to one thing, but there's lots of things here. But right now, what are you feeling really inspired by, or who in the world?
Yeah, so I think one is that this is a global movement. So I love the fact that whenever I'm speaking to, either activists or social artists in this space, the conversation isn't just about the local, it's around the global. And I think, obviously us two meeting, but, talking to the Black Feminist Fund and other activists across the globe, I think that recognition that this is a global struggle, that's the bit that really super excites me going forward. And then also, as I said, I think there are just the way that people are doing things intergenerationally and intersectionally with an intersectional lens, I think is just really exciting for me. But it's just around, if you're not going to change, you just need to move the money to them and move out of the way. You've got fabulous things like Project Talawa, which is a new fund from Mara Larisai that's being created, Baobab Foundation, Create Equity. You've got a number of these funds. NSUN have got their own funds, Black Thrive Global. If you can't do it, and you've got Decolonizing Wealth Project as well, if you can't do it, then move money to those organizations that are able to distribute it in the right way to our communities.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. We are at time, but I want to, we've been seeing the questions coming in from audience, and not just questions, but really beautiful comments and support for you, Derek, and the work that you're leading, and just people are feeling seen and inspired by your voice and your leadership. I do want to ask how folks can continue to follow your work, connect. I'm getting folks asking about how they can get the book, especially in the US, if you have any information. And we'll definitely also, as we post this recording to our YouTube channel, put in a bunch of links for folks. But how can people support this work and be a part of what you're doing in the UK?
Yeah, the book's at the normal outlets, but I would also say if online, go to the bookshop.org in terms of independent bookshops and being able to get it distributed through there. But it's in most of the normal outlets and online outlets in order to obtain it. Yeah.
Absolutely. We will absolutely be sharing. Everyone needs to get this book and read it. It is so good. Someone actually commented from the audience that this is the Bible that they are living by at the moment. And so I think that's quite a glowing endorsement. And I just want to thank you. Thank you for being a comrade in this work, in this struggle, and the liberation of people and the liberation of resources and money to people that are on the front lines of this work in the UK and around the world. and just look forward to all the work ahead and continuing to be in deep solidarity with you. So thank you for chatting, for the chin wag that we've been able to have today. I'm learning some UK slang here.
And Edgar, I just want to say, like, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. And just for everyone that's listening, look, when we get to the place that we want to get to in that liberation, there's going to be a party at the intersection. So yeah,
that's right. All right, I'm RSVPing for that for sure. All right, thanks, Derek, and thanks everybody for tuning in today, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Edgar.